A polished police badge gleamed on the steps of a Houston precinct as an officer did the unthinkable. He stared a quiet black man in the eyes and spat at his feet. The crowd went still. A cell phone was already recording. What Officer Brett Maddox did not know, what no one in that parking lot knew except one man, was that the person he had just humiliated would soon walk into that very precinct and sit behind the chief's desk as the new commanding officer. And that was only the beginning of the story. The heat in Houston, Texas, clung to the skin the moment anyone stepped outside. Inside the Grind and Gather coffee shop on Westheimer Road, the heavy blast of air conditioning felt like mercy. The room buzzed with soft indie folk music, the sharp hiss of the espresso machine, and the quiet murmurs of professionals bent over glowing laptop screens. In a corner booth facing the door, out of a habit he had never managed to break, sat Donovan Pierce. He was a tall, athletic black man, dressed simply in a fitted charcoal gray t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and worn leather boots. To anyone else in the cafe, he looked like just another customer enjoying a quiet drink while reading the news on his tablet. But Donovan was not just another customer. He was a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Violent Crimes and Organized Crime Task Force. His work involved dismantling cartels and hunting federal fugitives. For once, he was off duty under a rare mandatory break. All he wanted was a black Americano and a little peace. That peace shattered when the heavy glass door slammed open against the metal stop. Officer Brett Maddox of the local precinct strode inside. Maddox wore authority like a badly tailored suit, too loud, too stiff, and desperate to be noticed. His duty belt rattled with every heavy step across the hardwood floor. Around the Montrose district, he had a reputation, and it was not a good one. Locals knew him as a bully with a badge, a man who masked his insecurities by throwing his power at people who had little ability to fight back. He skipped the line at the counter without hesitation. Marin, a young barista with bright pink hair, stiffened as he approached. "Morning, Marin," Maddox barked, leaning over the glass pastry case until his knuckles turned pale. "Large dark roast, black, and grab me one of those bear claws." He did not offer to pay. He never did. Marin swallowed hard and hurried to fill the order. While he waited, Maddox hooked his thumbs into his leather duty belt and slowly scanned the cafe with suspicious eyes. He was not looking for crime. He was looking for a target. He liked making people uncomfortable. His gaze moved past the college students, past a middle-aged businessman typing on his laptop, and landed on Donovan in the corner booth. Donovan did not look up from his tablet. He had already noted the officer's entrance, the heavy footsteps, and the aggressive energy. In his mind, Maddox was not a threat, only an annoyance. He took a slow sip of his Americano. Maddox's jaw tightened. In his power-hungry mind, a casually dressed black man sitting alone in an affluent, gentrified cafe was an anomaly that demanded his attention. He grabbed his free coffee and pastry from Marin without a word of thanks. Instead of leaving, he began a slow, deliberate walk toward Donovan's table. Donovan felt the room change before Maddox said a word. The tapping of keyboards slowed. Quiet conversations faded. The air grew tight with discomfort. Maddox stopped at the edge of Donovan's small wooden table, standing far too close, deliberately looming over him. Donovan calmly finished the paragraph he was reading, locked his tablet, and finally looked up. His expression was unreadable. "Can I help you, officer?" he asked, his voice deep, smooth, and perfectly steady. Maddox took a loud sip of coffee and smacked his lips. "Just doing a little community policing," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You live around here, buddy?" "I don't see how that's any of your concern," Donovan replied politely, but firmly. He did not break eye contact. Maddox bristled. He was not used to people, especially minorities in that district, looking him in the eyes and calmly dismissing him. He expected stammering. He expected fear. "It becomes my concern when we've had reports of suspicious individuals loitering in local businesses," Maddox lied, a practiced smirk forming on his face. "You've been sitting here a while, waiting for someone or just scoping the place out?" Donovan exhaled slowly through his nose. His mind shifted from civilian calm to investigative precision. He understood the standards of a Terry stop. For a police officer to lawfully detain someone and demand identification, there had to be reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had been, was being, or was about to be committed. Maddox had nothing, and they both knew it. "I'm drinking an Americano," Donovan said, gesturing to the ceramic mug. "As far as I know, being a paying customer is not a crime in Texas. Am I suspected of committing a crime, officer?" Maddox's face flushed an angry, blotchy red. The smirk disappeared, replaced by a hard, cruel scowl. To him, Donovan's calm confidence felt like disrespect. "All right, wise guy," Maddox snapped, his voice bouncing off the brick walls. "Let's see some ID driver's license. Now." Behind the counter, Marin dropped a metal frothing pitcher. The clatter rang through the silent cafe. A few customers began packing their bags, desperate to avoid the confrontation. Others subtly tilted their phones toward the scene and started recording. "No," Donovan said simply. "Excuse me?" Maddox leaned down and placed one hand on the butt of his holstered Glock. It was an intimidation tactic, a silent threat designed to terrify. "I said no," Donovan repeated, his voice never rising above a calm conversational tone. "Under Texas Penal Code Section 38.02, I am not required to identify myself unless I am under lawful arrest. So I'll ask again. Am I suspected of a crime and am I under arrest?" Maddox reeled internally, but his ego would not let him back down. He was being legally outmaneuvered in public by a man he considered beneath him. Anger clouded whatever training remained in his head. "You're about to be under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order and interfering with a police investigation." Maddox spat, stepping so close that the toes of his boots nearly touched Donovan's shoes. "I'll drag you out of this shop in cuffs and throw you in the back of my cruiser if you don't hand over your ID right now, boy." The word boy hung in the air like poison. It was intentional, a racial insult disguised as authority. Maddox wanted Donovan to get angry. He wanted him to stand, raise his voice, or move too quickly. Anything that would give him an excuse to escalate physically. But Donovan was a man who had negotiated with armed hostage-takers and interrogated hardened cartel sicarios. A racist patrolman having an ego trip was not going to make him lose control. Instead, Donovan saw an opportunity. Officer Brett Maddox was actively displaying a severe deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Donovan decided to let him dig his own grave as deep as he could. "Officer," Donovan said, his voice dropping into a colder register, radiating an authority that made Maddox blink despite himself. "I strongly suggest you take a step back and consider the legal consequences of what you are doing. You are initiating an unlawful detention based on racial profiling." "I don't give a damn about your imaginary rights," Maddox snarled, unraveling in the face of public defiance. He slammed his coffee cup onto Donovan's table. Brown liquid splashed over the rim and soaked into the edge of Donovan's gray shirt. A gasp moved through the room. Ellis, the cafe manager, rushed out from the back office, his eyes wide. "Officer, please," Ellis said. "This man is a regular here. He hasn't caused any trouble." "Back off, Ellis," Maddox barked without looking away from Donovan. "This is official police business. Interfere, and you'll be joining him in jail." Maddox turned back to Donovan and unclipped the retention strap on his taser. "Last warning. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. You're being detained." Donovan slowly wiped spilled coffee from his tablet with a napkin. He took his time, showing a complete absence of fear. That only infuriated Maddox more. Then Donovan stood smoothly, making no sudden movement. At 6 feet 2 inches, he was taller than Maddox and broader through the shoulders. For a brief instant, real apprehension flickered in the officer's eyes as he recognized the physical difference between them. But Maddox had a badge, and in his mind, that made him untouchable. "Turn around," Maddox ordered, his hand tightening around the yellow grip of his taser. "I am complying with your orders under duress," Donovan stated clearly, making sure every phone recording caught his words. "I am not resisting, but I want it on record that this is an unlawful detention." Donovan slowly reached toward his back pocket. "Hands where I can see them! Stop reaching!" Maddox shouted, stepping back and drawing the taser. The laser sight landed on Donovan's chest. "I'm reaching for the identification you unlawfully demanded, officer," Donovan said evenly. Using only his thumb and index finger, He slowly removed a plain black leather wallet. He did not open it to reveal the gold FBI shield inside. Not yet. He simply slid his Texas driver's license from the front slot and held it out. Maddox snatched it from his fingers, breathing hard. He unclipped his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. Run a name for me. Pierce Donovan." He read off the date of birth and license number, his eyes fixed on Donovan with a sickening grin of triumph. Maddox was certain he would find a warrant. In his prejudiced mind, there was always a warrant. "We'll see how tough you are when we find out what you're hiding, Pierce," Maddox sneered. Donovan stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, watching the officer with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator watching prey walk willingly into a trap. "Take your time, officer," Donovan said softly. "But you should know, the system may flag that name a little differently than you expect." The silence inside the grind and gather was broken only by the static hiss of Maddox's shoulder radio. He stood with the taser still in his hand, the red laser dot trembling on Donovan's chest because his own adrenaline made his grip unstable. Maddox wore the smile of a man savoring unearned victory. He had his suspect. He had compliance. Now he needed the system to validate his prejudice. At the Houston Police Department's Central Dispatch Center, veteran dispatcher Tessa Monroe entered Donovan's information into the Texas Crime Information Center and the National Crime Information Center databases. She expected a routine result. Instead, her monitor locked. A high-contrast yellow and black warning border flashed across the screen. "Restricted information. Do not detain. Federal officer. Contact FBI Houston Field Office immediately. Verification code Alpha Tango 77. Tessa felt the color drain from her face. She had rarely seen a federal lockout of that level. It meant the officer in the field had just run the name of a high-ranking federal operative, an undercover agent, or a protected federal asset. And Maddox, the department's notorious hothead, was the one holding the radio. Tessa keyed her mic, her calm dispatcher tone replaced by urgency. "Unit 4 Bravo, this is dispatch. Status check. Are you currently detaining the subject?" The radio crackled on Maddox's shoulder. He pressed the button, never taking his eyes off Donovan. "Affirmative, dispatch. Subject is uncooperative. Waiting on that warrant check so I can slap the cuffs on him." Donovan raised one eyebrow. "Uncooperative," he echoed quietly. "That's an interesting interpretation for your official report." Back at dispatch, Tessa waved over her shift supervisor and pointed at the locked screen. The supervisor took one look, went pale, and grabbed the emergency phone connected directly to the FBI Houston Field Office. Tessa keyed the mic again. "Unit 4. Bravo. Step away from the subject. I repeat, step away from the subject immediately. Do not detain. Supervisor 41. Respond to 4 Bravo's location code 3. Priority emergency." The order rang loudly through the cafe. Customers still recording exchanged stunned glances. Maddox frowned. This was not how the script was supposed to go. "Dispatch 4 Bravo. Repeat that. Did you find a warrant or not? I have a hostile suspect here." "Negative, 4 Bravo. You do not have a hostile suspect. You have a hard federal lockout. Stand down immediately. Captain Warren Briggs is en route to your location. Do not initiate physical contact." Maddox froze. The words federal lockout and Captain Briggs hit him like a blow to the stomach. His mind struggled to process the information. He looked at the calm black man standing in front of him. The taser in his hand suddenly felt like a live grenade. "What did you do?" Maddox whispered harshly, his confidence collapsing into panic. "Did you hack the system? Who the hell are you?" The silence inside the grind and gather turned suffocating. The red laser from Maddox's taser still shook across Donovan's charcoal gray shirt, revealing the officer's rising fear more clearly than his face did. Donovan released a slow, tired breath. He had given the officer every possible way out. He had offered multiple chances to de-escalate. Maddox had chosen aggression every time, driven by unchecked bias and a fragile ego. The trap had closed. "I didn't hack the system, Brett," Donovan said, dropping the formal title. The use of his first name struck Maddox like a slap. His boots squeaked against the floor as he shifted uneasily. "I warned you about the legal consequences of initiating a Terry stop without reasonable, articulable suspicion," Donovan continued. His voice was even, cold and controlled. "I warned you about how the federal database might flag my name, but you were too busy trying to humiliate me in public to listen." Donovan slowly lowered his hands from his chest. Maddox tensed, gripping the taser so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he did not raise it higher. The dispatcher's command still echoed in his mind. "I'm going to reach into my left interior jacket pocket now," Donovan announced, loud enough for every phone microphone in the cafe to capture his words. "I am retrieving my official credentials. Let the record reflect that I am unarmed and moving slowly." Maddox swallowed hard. He was paralyzed. He wanted to shout a command and reclaim the dominance he believed he had, but dread had rooted him to the floor. Donovan reached into the breast pocket of his dark denim jacket and pulled out a second, thicker black leather wallet. He did not hurry. He used only his thumb and index finger, making the movement deliberately non-threatening. Then, with a sharp, practiced flick, the wallet opened. Sunlight from the front windows struck the unmistakable gleam of a solid gold eagle-top shield. Beneath it was a rigid Department of Justice identification card bearing Donovan's photograph, the official seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and his operational title. "Donovan Pierce," he said, his voice slicing through the room. "Senior Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Houston Field Office, Primary Supervisor of the Violent Crimes and Organized Syndicate Task Force." The effect on Officer Brett Maddox was immediate and devastating. He stumbled backward, his duty belt rattling as he tried to steady himself. His mouth fell open, but no words came out. The angry red flush drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, chalk-white pallor. "You're—" Maddox stammered, his voice cracking into a thin whisper. The full weight of his mistake crashed down on him. He had not harassed a random civilian. He had unlawfully detained, racially profiled, and threatened to tase a senior FBI agent in a room full of recording witnesses. "And you," Donovan said, taking one controlled step forward, reclaiming the entire room with that single movement, "are in catastrophic trouble. Holster your weapon right now." It was not a request. It was a tactical command delivered by a man with far greater rank, experience, and legal authority. Maddox's hand shook so violently that he nearly dropped the taser. He fumbled clumsily to slide it back into the holster and fastened the retention strap with numb fingers. A murmur moved through the coffee shop. First shock, then the unmistakable thrill of delayed justice. A college student in the back booth let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. Marin, who had been cowering near the pastry case, covered her mouth with both hands as tears of relief filled her eyes. The toxic fear Maddox had dragged into the room began to evaporate, replaced by the electric charge of coming accountability. "Agent Pierce, sir," Maddox whined, stepping back and shrinking into himself. "I didn't know. I swear I thought—" "Stop talking," Donovan interrupted coldly. "Anything you say now only adds to the federal civil rights violation you committed on high-definition video. You didn't have a suspect description. You had a prejudice. And unfortunately for you, Brett, you picked the wrong man to practice it on." The air inside the grind and gather felt thick and heavy after the reveal of Donovan Pierce's FBI shield. Officer Brett Maddox stood frozen, one hand hovering awkwardly near his duty belt, his eyes locked on the leather wallet in Donovan's steady hand. The gold eagle on the badge reflected warm cafe light into his terrified pupils. His entire worldview, built on unchecked authority and neighborhood intimidation, was crumbling in real time. The arrogant smirk that had been on his face had completely melted away. In its place was pure horror. He swallowed, but his mouth had gone dry. Around them, the atmosphere had changed. The fear that seized the customers when Maddox drew his taser was gone. In its place was a current of vindication. The college students who had hunched low in their booths now sat upright, phones angled perfectly to capture every detail of the officer's unraveling. They were no longer bystanders to a possible tragedy. They were witnesses to a career-ending downfall. Donovan did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood his ground with the calm professionalism of a man who had faced cartel bosses and international fugitives. To Donovan, Maddox was not a threat. He was a disgrace to the badge he wore. I... Maddox stammered, his voice trembling so badly it barely sounded human. He took an unsteady step back. Agent Pierce, sir, I had no idea. You fit a description. Do not insult my intelligence, Brett, Donovan said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a cutting edge that silenced the room. You and I both know there is no description. There was no radio call. There was no dispatch alert about a suspect matching my appearance in this area. You walked into this establishment, identified a target based solely on your own racial bias, and tried to use state power to humiliate me. You created a situation to feed your ego, and you did it while armed. Maddox flinched, as though the words had struck him. He opened his mouth to search for another excuse, but the rising wail of sirens cut him off. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, red and blue flashes fractured the sunlight outside. 2 Houston Police Department cruisers jumped the curb and stopped at harsh angles near the front entrance. A black unmarked Chevy Tahoe roared into the lot and blocked them in. The glass door was yanked open. Captain Warren Briggs stormed inside. Briggs was a veteran of the force, a man whose sharply pressed uniform and rigid bearing matched his no-nonsense reputation. His face burned with fury. 2 heavily armored patrol sergeants flanked him, scanning the room with cautious hands near their belts. Behind them came Archer Stone, the special agent in charge of the Houston FBI field office. Dressed in a tailored Navy suit, he carried the unmistakable weight of federal authority. His eyes immediately locked on Donovan, silently checking that his senior agent was unharmed. The arrival of command-level brass hit Maddox like a blow to the chest. The remaining color drained from his face. His knees buckled and he grabbed the edge of Donovan's table to keep from collapsing. "Captain Briggs, sir, Briggs, sir," Maddox gasped, trying desperately to stand at attention. "I can explain everything. It's a massive misunderstanding. The suspect, the gentleman—"
"Shut your damn mouth, Maddox,"
Captain Briggs roared. His voice slammed against the exposed brick walls hard enough to rattle espresso cups behind the counter. He did not even look at the trembling officer. Briggs walked directly to Donovan's corner booth. His eyes moved from the coffee dripping off the table, to the unclipped taser strap, to the federal shield still open in Donovan's hand. The captain exhaled heavily, his anger briefly mixed with deep institutional embarrassment. "Agent Pierce," Briggs said, his tone shifting to professional respect. He extended a firm hand. "I'm Captain Warren Briggs, commanding officer of this district. I cannot properly express how sorry I am for what happened here. Are you injured?" "I'm perfectly fine, Captain Briggs," Donovan replied, slipping his badge back into his jacket and shaking his hand. "Though I can't say the same for my shirt, or for the constitutional rights of the citizens your officer is supposed to protect." He initiated an unlawful detention under threat of force, with no probable cause or articulable suspicion. Sacy, Archer Stone stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floorboards. He crossed his arms and looked at Maddox with a gaze cold enough to freeze the room. "Captain Briggs," Stone said quietly, his voice carrying the full weight of the federal government. "We received a Tier 1 lockout alert from dispatch. My senior task force supervisor was being detained by a beat cop who, according to the audio feed, claimed he had a hostile, uncooperative suspect. Explain to me how a man drinking coffee off duty becomes a hostile threat to the city of Houston." Maddox began to hyperventilate. His lungs seemed unable to pull in enough air. "Sir, I was conducting proactive community policing," he stammered. "We've had complaints about loitering. I asked for identification, and he refused a lawful order. I was following standard procedure for an uncooperative subject." "He's lying." The shout came from the counter. Marin stepped out from behind the espresso machine. Her hands shook, but her voice was loud and fierce. "He came in here. He demanded free food like he always does. Then he walked straight over to this man for absolutely no reason. He called him boy. He pulled his taser on him. We all have it on video." A chorus of agreement rose from the customers. Several held up their phones. the glowing screens displaying undeniable evidence of Maddox's abuse of power. Captain Briggs closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose as the full scale of the liability crashing down on his department became impossible to deny. He turned slowly toward Maddox. "Proactive community policing," Briggs repeated, the words dripping with venom. "You arrogant, stupid son of a... You don't know the first thing about policing. You think that badge on your chest gives you the right to walk into a business and terrorize a civilian to feed your pathetic ego. You think the law doesn't apply to you?" "Captain, please," Maddox begged, tears spilling from his eyes. "I have a career. I have a wife. I have 2 kids in high school. Please don't do this here. Let me go back to the precinct. I'll resign. I swear I'll hand in my papers. Just let me walk away with my pension." "Your pension?" Stone interrupted with a dark, humorless scoff. "Officer Maddox, you're standing here worried about retirement money when you should be worried about retaining a federal defense attorney. You didn't just violate department policy. You engaged in deprivation of rights under color of law. That is a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. It is a federal felony." Maddox gasped, one hand flying to his chest. "A felony? No. It was just a stop. A pedestrian stop. You can't ruin my life over a mistake." "You ruined your own life," Donovan said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "The moment you decided your prejudice mattered more than the United States Constitution. You chose this." Captain Briggs had heard enough. Disgust radiated from him. He looked toward the 2 patrol sergeants near the door. "Sergeants, step forward." The 2 men marched across the cafe and flanked Maddox on both sides. Maddox shrank between them, suddenly looking small and fragile. "Officer Brett Maddox," Briggs said loudly, making sure every camera in the room captured the administrative action. "Due to your egregious documented conduct, including the unlawful detention of a federal agent, the attempted false arrest of a citizen, and the unauthorized threat of force, you are hereby stripped of all police powers. You are relieved of duty immediately." "Warren, please," Maddox sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "Strip him," Briggs ordered, ignoring the plea completely. The public dismantling was swift, methodical, and humiliating. The first sergeant unclipped the radio microphone from Maddox's shoulder, cutting him off from dispatch. The second moved behind him and unbuckled the heavy leather duty belt that carried his entire arsenal of intimidation. The belt, loaded with his Glock, spare magazines, handcuffs, pepper spray, and yellow taser, dropped away. Without it, Maddox looked strangely incomplete, stripped of the menace he had always hidden behind. Captain Briggs stepped close. With one sharp motion, he ripped the silver Houston Police Department badge from Maddox's uniform shirt. The pin tore a small hole in the blue fabric. Maddox stood trembling, disarmed, defrocked, and ruined in the same room he had tried to dominate. "You will be placed in the back of my cruiser," Briggs said in a harsh, low voice, meant only for him. "You will be transported directly to Internal Affairs. You will not speak. You will not make a phone call until you are inside an interrogation room. And you will pray the federal government offers you a plea deal, because I will personally make sure you never wear a uniform in this state again." Briggs stepped back. "Get him out of my sight." The sergeants grabbed Maddox by the arms and turned him toward the door. They marched him past the counter, past the glowing phones, and past Donovan Pierce's steady, unblinking gaze. Brett Maddox hung his head and wept as the crushing weight of his own karma finally brought him down. The silence inside the grind and gather was absolute as the sergeants escorted him toward the front door. The same heavy glass door he had thrown open with arrogant entitlement was now pushed open for him. He was taken out not as a guardian of the community, but as a disgraced captive, stripped of his badge, weapon, taser, and radio. His uniform looked like a costume. As his boots crossed from the cold cafe into the humid Houston air, the tension inside finally broke. It began with one slow clap from a middle-aged businessman in the back booth. The sound grew into a wave of applause, cheers, and mocking whistles from the customers. They had just watched a predatory bully receive instant, devastating consequences, and they savored every second of it. People crowded near the glass windows, holding their phones high to capture Maddox's defeated exit, The flashing red and blue lights washed over his pale, tear-streaked face, exposing his ruin for everyone to see. One sergeant placed a firm hand on Maddox's head and pushed him into the plastic-lined back seat of Captain Briggs's vehicle. The door slammed shut with a metallic thud that sounded like the closing of a coffin lid on his career. Back inside the cafe, the air felt charged with witnessed justice. Donovan Pierce remained composed. He picked up a dry napkin and calmly dabbed the last drops of Americano from the edge of his tablet. Then he slid his FBI shield safely into the interior pocket of his jacket and walked to the counter. Marin leaned against the espresso machine, hands over her mouth, still shaking from the adrenaline. Ellis stood beside her, looking equally stunned. Donovan pulled his leather wallet from his back pocket, removed a crisp $50 bill, and placed it gently in the glass tip jar. "Keep the change, Marin and Ellis. I apologize for the disruption." His voice had returned to the warm, smooth baritone he had carried before everything spiraled. He placed a white business card on the counter. It bore the seal of the Department of Justice. When HPD Internal Affairs and the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility come to collect your statements and security footage, they may try to hurry you. If anyone gives you a hard time, or if you feel intimidated in any way, call the number on the back of that card. It rings directly to my desk. Marin wiped a tear from her cheek and gave him a radiant, grateful smile. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Agent Pierce. He's been terrorizing people in this neighborhood for so long. Nobody ever stood up to him." "Bullies only thrive in the dark, Marin," Donovan said softly. Someone finally turned on the lights, but the consequences for Brett Maddox did not end at the curb of Westheimer Road. His nightmare had only begun. Afterward, the reality of his situation set in. Maddox sat in a sterile, windowless interrogation room deep inside the Houston Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The room was freezing. Cold air poured from an overhead vent, turning the sweat on his skin icy. He sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, staring at the scarred surface of the table. He was still wearing his stripped uniform, a brutal reminder of everything he had lost. The heavy steel door clicked open. Captain Warren Briggs entered, followed by FBI Special Agent in Charge Archer Stone. Neither man carried a notepad. They did not need one. Stone moved with terrifying precision and tossed a thick manila folder onto the table. The slap echoed like a gunshot in the small room. "You didn't just step on a landmine, Maddox," Stone said, his voice deadly quiet and completely stripped of professional courtesy. "You took a running leap and landed on it with both feet." Maddox flinched and folded inward, trying to make himself smaller. He looked up with bloodshot, pleading eyes. "Captain Briggs, please. I'm begging you. I'll resign. I'll sign whatever paperwork you want. I'll surrender my state certification. Just let me walk away. I have a mortgage. I need my pension." Captain Briggs released a sharp laugh with no humor in it. He leaned over the table, placing his knuckles flat on the metal surface, bringing his face close to Maddox's. "Resign?" Briggs spat. "You don't get the luxury of a quiet resignation, Brett. You are being fired with extreme prejudice, but your employment status is the smallest problem you have now. Open the folder." Maddox's hands shook violently as he lifted the heavy cover. Inside were pages of transcripts, dispatch logs, and still images from body-worn cameras. "While you were sitting in here feeling sorry for yourself," Stone said, pacing behind Maddox's chair, "federal analysts cross-referenced your badge number with dispatch records and body camera uploads. You have a documented, undeniable, systematic pattern of targeting minority citizens in affluent neighborhoods. You conveniently failed to activate your microphone. You escalated routine encounters. You manufactured probable cause to justify unconstitutional searches." Maddox buried his face in his hands as a low sob tore from his throat. The walls were closing in. "It wasn't like that," he mumbled. "It's a tough district. I was just doing my job." "Your job is not to be a tyrant," Briggs snapped. "District Attorney Clayton Mercer is reviewing your personnel file. Because of your actions, every arrest you made, every citation you issued, and every piece of evidence you collected is now legally compromised. Defense attorneys across Harris County are already preparing emergency motions based on your documented history of racial profiling and perjury. You are going to cost the city millions in civil rights settlements. Stone stopped pacing and leaned close to Maddox's ear. "This is no longer an administrative matter, Brett. This is a federal criminal investigation for deprivation of rights under color of law. You attempted to use state authority to unlawfully detain and physically threaten a citizen based on racial bias. The fact that the citizen happened to be a senior federal agent simply ensures that we have the resources to bury you under a federal penitentiary." The justice that followed was swift, absolute, and unforgiving. The high-definition videos recorded by customers at the Grind and Gather spread across social media. The footage of Maddox threatening Donovan, followed by the dramatic reveal of the FBI shield and Maddox being disarmed in public, appeared across major national news outlets. Maddox became a symbol of unchecked police arrogance and instant karma. The Houston police chief stood beside Stacey Archer Stone at a joint press conference, publicly announcing Maddox's termination and the launch of a sweeping federal civil rights investigation into his conduct. The Department of Justice later handed down a grand jury indictment. A heavily armored FBI SWAT Bearcat rolled onto the manicured lawn of Maddox's suburban home. Tactical operators in full ballistic gear breached his front door with a steel battering ram. It was a dark, poetic mirror of the intimidation tactics Maddox had used against marginalized citizens for so long. He was dragged from his home in pajamas, handcuffed, and placed into the back of a federal transport vehicle, while his neighbors watched in stunned silence. He was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 242 and faced a mountain of evidence: his own body camera footage, the viral cafe recordings, and a long line of previous victims willing to testify. Maddox realized there was no way out. His private defense attorney, paid for by draining what little savings he had, warned him that taking the case to trial would bring the harshest outcome. Broken, terrified, and abandoned by the union that had once protected him, Maddox accepted a heavy plea deal. The final chapter of his downfall unfolded in a wood-paneled federal courtroom in downtown Houston. Brett Maddox stood before United States District Judge Alden Reeves. He was no longer the arrogant patrolman with a heavy-duty belt and puffed-up pride. He wore a shapeless orange jumpsuit. His wrists were locked in heavy handcuffs attached to a belly chain, and his ankles shuffled in steel shackles. He looked defeated. Judge Reeves peered over his reading glasses with profound disgust. "Mr. Maddox," the judge said, his voice echoing through the silent gallery, "you were entrusted with a badge, a firearm, and the profound authority to protect the public. Instead, you used that sacred trust as a weapon to terrorize those you believed were beneath you. You operated under the delusion that your uniform made you untouchable. You are a stain on the honorable profession of law enforcement, and your actions have deeply fractured public trust." The gavel struck. The sentence sent Maddox to federal prison, placed him under supervised release afterward, permanently revoked his law enforcement certification, and dissolved his pension to cover court fees and mandatory victim restitution. As federal marshals took him by the arms and led him away, Maddox looked back at the gallery. The seats were empty. His wife, Sloan, unable to endure the national humiliation and financial ruin he had brought upon their family, had filed for divorce. He had lost his freedom, his career, his retirement, his family, and his dignity. He had nothing left. As for Donovan Pierce, life continued as it should. He returned to the Grind and Gather. The air conditioning was cold. Indie folk music hummed softly. The smell of roasted coffee filled the room. He sat in the same corner booth, opened his tablet, and took a slow sip of his large black Americano. The system had worked, but only because a man who knew his rights refused to bow to a tyrant. It was peaceful again. What you just heard is not merely a dramatic story. It is a stark and powerful reminder that the abuse of power always carries a heavy, unavoidable price. When arrogant people believe a badge gives them permission to trample civil liberties and act on deep prejudice, they forget one of the most important rules of the universe. Karma never loses an address. Justice has a way of balancing the scales. Officer Maddox thought he had found an easy target to satisfy his fragile ego. Instead, he triggered his own destruction, losing his freedom, career, family, reputation, and dignity. The universe does not tolerate bullies. If this hard-hitting story of justice gave you that deep satisfaction of seeing truth win, hit the like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a powerful reminder that no one is above the law. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories of karma, justice, and the triumph of truth.